the majority of history that we have is largely taken from Suraj Prakash. So when McAuliffe is writing his, history of the Sikhs in English, when he asks for source material, the Panth at that time suggests to him that you should read Suraj Prakash. And he does take from Suraj Prakash, but there's elements of it that he's like, oh, it's Indic mythology, Hindu mythology, I'm going to throw that aside. He doesn't know how to utilize that, and he doesn't know how to contextualize that in the context of storytelling.
What's going on, everyone? It's Ramblings of a Sikh here with another podcast episode. This time I'm joined by someone who's been heavily requested by our audience, academic, historian and Suraj Podcast curator Jvalla Singh. As you probably guessed, we'll be discussing everything related to Suraj Prakash and more, so don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Otherwise than that, let's get straight into it.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's been a long time coming, and glad we can make time for this.
Thank you so much. I think you can attest to the amount that I've been bugging you to come onto this podcast, and I appreciate with how busy you are and everything that you're doing, that you've taken the time out today to do this. Before we get into the thick of things, could you possibly just, in a couple of sentences, explain to those listening what Suraj Prakash is?
Sure, yeah. So for those who don't know anything about the Suraj Prakash, this is a text written it was completed in 1843. We'll go over how long it took to complete it. But this is a text which studies the history of all the 10 gurus, starting from Guru Nanak up to Guru Gobind Singh. And it provides basically the Sikh community with its own epic. Like this is like the epic for the Sikh community. This is the largest single text we have in the Sikh community. It's 60,000 verses long. And it takes the listener through a journey, through every single emotion. The poet, Kavi Santokh Singh, the author, has constructed in such a way that the listener experiences, happiness, sadness, enthusiasm, fright, biras, heroic spirit through all of these stories. And it really is something that has lasted the test of time. This is written in 1843, but still to this day, a Katha discourse is done of this text every day at the Takhats in India, and we're seeing it in the diaspora as well, in Vancouver, Toronto. I've seen it in California, London, perhaps other places in England. People are engaging with this text, and that's why we've taken this on in the Suraj Podcast to convey the text in its accurate meaning and its original in English. And we can talk about the podcast later on, but that's just a little kind of a brief summary of the text.
Just two things I wanted to follow up on. So you'd mentioned that it was completed in 1843. How long did that take to compile the whole text? And then secondly, you mentioned it become very well established in the Gurdwaras kind of around India and around the world. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's just a clarification there. I did want to say that. So it was completed in 1843, but it basically took about 10 years to construct. So the poet Santokh Singh, he writes the first portion of it, Nanak Prakash, in about 2 years, and that's about 10,000 verses. And that was, I think, from 1821 to 23, around that time. And then he writes the last component from Guru Angad Dev Ji up to Guru Gobind Singh, and that he writes from 1835 to 1843. So that's about 10 years in total. So it did take quite a significant portion of his life to write that. And even the publication of like the way we have received Suraj Prakash today through Bhai Veer Singh, he himself also took about 9 years to publish that, almost close to 10 years to publish that, meaning he had manuscripts of the text. It was already being published in Ladivar, in the script that's kind of all conjoined. And what he was doing to make it easier for people to read, he was splitting up the words in something we call padshad or praya, and that took him 10 years. He was also adding footnotes that his father had made of the text as well, and he was also adding commentary and this massive introduction. It was like 250 pages, just the introduction for that text. So he also took about 10 years to publish this text. So it was a very lengthy process to get this text firstly constructed, and then Veer Singh, when he's publishing it in printing press, to put it out there for the wider audience so that they can read it. But we know that, so it was completed in 1843. We know that by 1880, this text was just everywhere. We have so many writings about this text. We have, like, for example, do you know Leitner's text, right? Indigenous Education. In that, he talks about, the poet Santokh Singh has made himself immortal. This is the words that he said. And he's writing out all the other significant, poets, authors of the Sikh community. He says Santokh Singh has made himself immortal through his works. And he's also talking about, various translations of Santokh Singh's works at that time. I think they were writing it in Shamukhi. Some princely states were doing that for greater access. And also you have like the legends as well, like Baba Sumer Singh, Takat Patna Sahib Jathedar, one of the best Braj poets. He talks about Santokh Singh's writings. This is in 1880 as being like the Jahaj, like the vessel that is going to take Singh's across, because for them, like, this is how they enjoyed this text so much when reading the history. This is another thing I want to stress about this text, is that this text is not just on this date the Guru went here, on that date the Guru went there. Like, when you read this text, you're just so absorbed in kind of the flavor, the ras of these, wild, amazing stories of the history of the Guru. So you have other people like Gyani Gyan Singh who are basing large amounts of their work on Suraj Prakash, which he even writes. And Veer Singh himself, like all these people. So both sides of camps, like we'll get into this later when we go into the Singh Sabha period. But, this text was renowned through any, camp that you were in. You looked at this text and you were just in awe of it.
Considering it's not Gurbani, how is Kavi Santokh Singh's work able to so quickly become, say, on par with the works of Bhai Mani Singh or Bhai Nand Lal?
Yeah, because it's a unique position, right? So, and this is something I want to get through to the audience as well, is that this text obtained such a unique position within the community. So you mentioned like Bhai Nand Lal, Bhai Gurdas. These people have written, poetry, and, it's sung in Gurdwaras as well. But the story of the Santokh Singh's works is like, so when he has completed Gur Pratap Suraj Prakash, he takes a manuscript to Akal Takht. And, various sources mention this. Veer Singh writes about this. And he offers it to the Akal Takht as an offering that, I've completed this work. And it appears that even by that period of time, like Santokh Singh does not become famous after. It appears that even at that point, people from around Amritsar were streaming in to see Santokh Singh. At that point, he was, I think, around the age of 57. I'm not exactly sure, around that age. And he was quite sick at that point when he was completing Suraj Prakash. And so people were streaming in to kind of see him. And he did an ardas there to kind of offer this text to the Khalsa at Akal Takht. And they took it in, and they were just, the people that were leading the community were so shocked at how amazing this text was that they kind of mandated it at that point, that we should read this in the afternoon. And if you go to like Takht Huzur Sahib, Takht Patna Sahib, etc., in the afternoon they have Gatha there. I think it's around 4:00 every day of this text. I think for about an hour. And this is important because many Gyanis think the first body, the first step into Sikhi is through itihas, is through history. Because if you don't have an understanding about what Guru Nanak did, what Guru Gobind Singh did, what the other Gurus did, then how are you going to be interested in what they wrote? So it's like the first step for building a connection with the community. Hence, it's done at a time when people would come to the Gurdwara in the afternoon, just after work or what have you. And, they would engage with history. And then through that engagement, then they would slowly trickle into Gurbani, because Gurbani is very, a difficult subject to just dive into, without knowing anything about the culture, without knowing about the gurus. So this provides that connection. That's why Sumer Singh, when he's writing, he says this is the Jahaj, the ship, which is going to take the community across, because it provides that bridge, that gap, that through this, they can understand the gurus, they can understand the history, and then through that, they have a connection with Gurbani. And this is something that Santokh Singh himself writes in the text, is that those who read this, this, text has, just like at the end of Chandi Divar or at the end of Anand Sahib, a portion called Fal Shruti. Fal Shruti means the fruit of listening to this text. At the end of the Chandi Divar, it's like, Fer na juni aya jine gaya. That's a very common thing, right? People have at the end of text. Santokh Singh has his version of that, saying as well, like, those who listen to this gatha will have more prem for when they read Gurbani. They'll have a better connection with the Guru, because you're so immersed with these stories, right? And, it provides historical context, Uttanaka, for a lot of Gurbani as well. When did the Guru recite this? Who was he talking to when reciting this Gurbani, etc.? So because it provides that gap, it provides this connection to attached to Gurbani. Many of the Gyanis at that time have mandated that this be done every day, and this is a tradition that continues to this day.
That is fascinating. You mentioned that Suraj Prakash is around 60,000 verses and is an epic in its proportions and ability to immerse the reader. So would it be fair to say it's kind of similar to Mahabharata or Ramayana?
This is our Ramayana. This is our Mahabharata. This is our epic. Yeah, and this is not my own opinion. This is how scholars have thought about this text as well. And this is how Santokh Singh himself was trained as well. Santokh Singh, before writing Guru Pratap, Suraj Prakash, I will get to his other writings. Santokh Singh writes a Braj version of the Valmiki Ramayana for his patron Raja Uday Singh of Kathal. And so he has training in this, and he has training in kind of curating stories from start to finish. And that's another thing that I want to stress. Like, why does Suraj attain such a status as it does? Is because he's not just coming up with these stories, off the top of his head. What Santokh Singh is a curator. He has all these sources, and he's curating that information in the best way possible, using the best storytelling techniques that he has available to him and presenting that to an audience. So, for example, and we'll get to the controversy as well later on, but a lot of the controversy that people kind of point to Suraj, saying, oh, Santokh Singh is saying X or he's saying Y and Z, those sources can be seen prior to Santokh Singh. Like, he's taking information prior to him, that what is available to him. For example, in Janam Sakis, in Bhai Mani Singh's literature, in the Gurbalas, Pache Chemi, Dasmi, etc., Sikhandi Pagatmala, etc. And he's just, conveying that in a very accurate manner, mind you, which is something that has been a point of amazement to me as I do my research, is how closely he is, adhering to his sources that he has at hand. So yeah, that's one point I find really funny, is about the controversy that people lay on Santokh Singh, but really that is coming well before him.